Tyler Vaughn with another episode of Between the Post, a podcast where we focus on talking goalkeepers specifically and really just soccer in general. One of the main things here we focus on, for those of you that have listened before, or if this is your first time, is we're always looking to deliver information, education, and inspiration to help you guys be the best coach, player, parent, and even fan you can be. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I wanted to dive into something that I think is pretty relevant. I personally, as a director of goalkeeping, former goalkeeper, been around for quite some time, don't know everything by any stretch, but, I find myself at this point in my coaching career, playing being a laughable moment, but I find myself reflecting a lot, about strategies, whether it be strategies in training sessions on the field or just in how we interact with players and encourage them to grow. I find myself always trying to look back, reflect, and a lot of the times on this podcast, that's what we're going to try to offer you guys, whether we have a guest on or not. We're hoping to convey and communicate things that all of us have done out there, whether it were positive things or potentially not necessarily negative, but learning moments. We always want to introduce those so that we can hopefully continue to push the next generation of goalkeepers. Whether you are an active goalkeeper right now, at any level, any age, we're trying to introduce concepts, topics, and a bit of information to save you guys from the same troubles that we all have faced as goalkeepers. We understand that learning is all about the growth process, and sometimes you've got to fail to move forward and learn from it. But anytime we can help you guys, that's what we're here for. So today's topic, training young goalkeepers. I talk to goalkeeper coaches all the time throughout the U.S. Specifically, and one of the things we all struggle with, and I'll use myself today as a bit of an example because it's something I very much struggle with. We struggle with young goalkeepers and exactly how best to train them, how to educate them, how to instruct them to become a better goalkeeper, right? Now, let's first define, as we broach this topic, let's define the age player we're talking about. So I'm talking U9 and below, right? So we're talking some young kids, definitely at the developmental level. And I think that's where we're going to focus on this particular young training aspect here for those kids at that particular age. I've got to introduce this topic and give you guys a little bit of background on what I've found and what I've been experiencing over the past probably 6 months. As a director of goalkeeping, and then prior to that role, just training goalkeepers at a variety of different levels at clubs throughout my career. I always tended to focus somehow, and I guess maybe prefer, I'm not really sure, but prefer to work with goalkeepers that were a little bit older. That wasn't necessarily intentional, but it just kind of happened to be the case. And whether it was coaching older players at the club level from a team standpoint, I always kind of found myself coaching those higher levels from probably the middle school onward, right? But players that kind of have the background, they should have some of the technique, well, you hope. But they introduce a different challenge. So when we're talking here, these goalkeepers at U9 level, frankly, up until about the last 6 months, that was an area of great weakness and kind of blindness for me. I had no experience there. Frankly, I didn't know what to do when it came to training a young goalkeeper, right? And it's such an odd thing. And, any of us who have been goalkeepers in the past, whether we're coaches, players, or whatever it might be, you look back and you think, well, I was a great goalkeeper back when. Surely I know the technique and I can remember what it takes to get to the point, where you might be today for a young goalkeeper. But in reality, I struggle with that philosophy. I look back and I said, oh yeah, this is exactly how you catch a ball. Well, then going to break that down into a training session that a U9 can tackle in bite-sized chunks, I guess. That's where I struggled and really found a weakness of mine. I came from, like I said, coaching so many older level kids where frankly you go out every single time and you offer this high level training session, fit for the player, fit for the group, but you're going out and you're really trying to work as much on the fitness aspects as well as the technique, right? We've kind of got these particular players that I was most used to training past the phase of technique. You always strengthen, you always look for weaknesses and correct those type of those weaknesses in their game. But you're kind of past the developmental phase, right? We're talking players that potentially are seeking to get scholarship and go to the next level, either collegiate or onward. And for me, that was where my sweet spot was. That was where I felt most comfortable. So it was a bit of a vulnerable moment when I took a step back, helping out another club and fitting into kind of a different role at this particular club in the North Carolina area. And going into a situation where we had more players at the U11, 12 age group and below, that to me was a bit of a scary task, right? And I kind of held off for probably some months before I committed to filling this role, and you know. I held off because it just wasn't a comfort level, right? And it put me outside of my comfort zone. And I was thinking, how in the world can I go from training high level players? And it's not that they don't have things to work on, but it's such a different training session, right? And how in the world can I learn enough? I'm thinking, how do I do a session with a U9? And I think for me, this was a great opportunity to really continue to evolve as a coach. I found out, so many different times over my coaching career, you find your weaknesses, right? Not necessarily weaknesses as players, but weaknesses as a coach and how you communicate with players. How you look at the game different from the sideline that you might have from inside the goal or elsewhere on the field. So this was another opportunity for me. I'd come off of a long year of taking some time away, not necessarily from the game itself, but just away from the sideline and away from the training. And that was a needed time away. But diving back in, I didn't necessarily think I'd be diving back into a situation where not only I was coming off of a long break from coaching, and now I'm diving back in and I'm just completely throwing myself into a loop of what in the world are you doing and how do you do it? So it was a great opportunity, a great challenge, and that's kind of what led me to today's topic of, how do you go about training those young goalkeepers? What do you focus on? How do you work with them? What should those key takeaways be at that particular level in terms of players? So I'm hopeful that this is going to help you guys out there that are in the same situation as I am. It's been such a great, I look back on almost a year now, it's been such a great decision that I made to go into it. These young kids are so impressionable, and for a lot of us coaches, that's what we're here for, is to try to encourage players to take their game to the next level. And everyone's starting point and ending point at the beginning and end of a season should hopefully obviously be different. And it's our job as coaches to determine how far we can get these players and take them from point A to point B. So I look back, and this was one of the first things that came to mind when I'm thinking topics that I can blend with, what hopefully other coaches out there and parents can kind of look at and listen to and say, hey, it's not just me. I'm not the only one going through this reflective period or these challenges. Not that Tyler is necessarily the pinnacle of goalkeeping excellence, but again, I hope I'm a voice of reason and kind of reinforcing, look, everyone goes through it. Let's introduce some strategies so that you can hopefully move through that phase and continue to help encourage players. So, at the U9 level, what do we teach them, right? That was the biggest challenge for me. What are we teaching these U9 and below players, these kids that, frankly, they're not goalkeepers yet, and they don't even know they're goalkeepers yet. And frankly, though you may think, or a parent may think, or a coach might think, oh, this is for sure my goalkeeper, it's not really fair to box in a young player at that age into the position. So we're not really thinking these are players who 100% will be goalkeepers. I don't know that it's necessarily a fair assumption to make at that particular level. And I think it's generally accepted in the soccer and goalkeeping community that we're not defining players really at any position in the U9 and a U10 and below age group, right? And we're not forcing them to play goalkeeper full time. Think about it as an opportunity to give them a taste of what the position really has to offer. Maybe you identify a handful of players out there on the team, or maybe you're the coach that cycles everybody through, right? You're going to quickly find out those who have a natural ability and knack for the position, and obviously those who would rather hide in the bottom corner of the goal when anyone gets around them, right? So I think that we have to kind of evolve our thinking there, right? We're not really looking, so many kids, even at these young age, they have access to social media, they see on TV, they've got these heroes and these players that they idolize and look up to, and that's great, right? we're seeing players come out at the youngest of ages thinking, well, fantastic, I'm going to look like the best goalkeeper out there. I want to be in the net. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's a great opportunity. But let's not forget that a great goalkeeper today, a modern goalkeeper of our time today, has to be almost equally as successful with a ball at their feet as they do in their hands, right? And you have to be a very well-rounded player. So when we're talking these younger age groups, we don't want to sacrifice the development of the total player just because a player, parent, coach, or whoever it might be is thinking, well, yep, here's this 9-year-old. They're my next goalkeeper. They're my next big thing at the club. So we really have to suck up our egos a little bit, and that's kind of where I find the conversation starting, right, with a lot of coaches. Is we've just got to reflect and say, listen, it's not fair to any particular player at this age to stick them in the net full time and say, hey, listen, you caught a couple balls last week at our training session. Surely you're my next goalkeeper, right? So we kind of have to take a step back, and I think that as youth sports, youth soccer specifically, youth goalkeeping is developing, and I think we're actually reflecting on that, and the things that I'm seeing are really a positive change from what we may have been doing in the past. So, what do you teach these players, right? Whether you're a coach that's not as familiar with goalkeeping, the position, whether you're a coach that knows soccer in and out, but you have no clue about the position of goalkeeper, there's so many different scenarios of coaches that I see in terms of their comfort level with keeping. Some have a level of go stand in the net, let me smash some soccer balls at you. Others have an understanding of, hey, yep, this is a great drill to incorporate goalkeeping, at the higher age groups to where both the keeper and the field players get benefit from the session. But when it comes down to the U9-10 level, we have a lot of volunteers, and that's fantastic, right? Now, that does not necessarily mean when we say the term volunteer, that defines your knowledge of the game. But we have volunteers who maybe they just don't have time in the day to plan a session. Maybe they stepped up to fill a void because their son or daughter's on the team. And all of these are positive things. These are not negatives. So what we have to do is try to support these coaches at these levels. Whether it's a volunteer or not, it's really irrelevant. Because hopefully we've got someone in that position, and I'm sure you are, that's just there to try to help the kids learn and have fun while they're playing. So, what do you teach at the U9 and lower levels? Or you could, sidebar, or you could be someone like me who's been around goalkeeping for almost 2 decades and is still trying to figure out how in the world do I instruct a U9. So let's be really clear. The spectrum that we're referring to on this particular episode of coaches, it's everybody. So at the U9 and below level, we're talking basic rules of goalkeeping, right? I mean, literally, basic rules of goalkeeping. Here's your box. Use your hands inside. Don't use your hands outside, right? So those simple basic rules, and I'm not going to go into all the basic rules, clearly. That'll eat up time, but the simple things. Well, what happens when the ball goes out of bounds? What does the goalkeeper do? One of the first things that I should have looked in the mirror and just pointed and laughed at myself. When I started this out, I found myself in a research mode, right? Figure it out, educate myself, looking at other resources, other coaching sessions, trying to learn what in the world do I do with these U9, U10 players, these young kids, and of course, egos get into, goalkeepers are known a bit for their egos, and I'm thinking, all right, great. I've got this totally under control. I can do this. Man, I'm the best thing that ever happened to these kids. And we all know that we have those moments, but I thought about it, and I'm thinking, well, all right, so I didn't approach it in the manner we're going to talk through today, but basic rules of goalkeeping. I had no clue, nor did it ever come to my attention that, well, what should a goalkeeper be doing when they make a save, right? We talk distribution at the higher levels, we talk support, we talk balance, communication, but those things are over the head of an 8-year-old. I didn't even think to go over the fact that, all right, when you get the ball in your hands, when it goes out for a goal kick, what should they be doing? Here we are thinking on such a high level, I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and let's work on diving, simplified, but diving to the left, to the right, real super simple stuff. When in reality, that's not what the kids were even struggling with. So I had a moment, I was out watching a couple games, looking at the goalkeepers and evaluating them. And I realized, hey, in terms of in the net, they're doing a fantastic job. Weaknesses being simpler things like the ball goes out of bounds, not knowing what to do, taking a goal kick, essentially giving it up to the other team that's standing on the top of their area, and then they go and they score a goal just because he or she didn't know what to do. So I really had to reflect on that, and it really did kind of revolutionize and really evolve my training into doing more of a comprehensive approach. So basic rules of goalkeeping is number one. The second thing is proper catching technique. Really hammer down with these kids when we're talking at the developmental level. Ball on the ground, get your hands down there early. Identify what type of save, what type of technique, even at the youngest levels and at the simplest level, what type of technique is needed here. Really encourage these kids to getting their hands in position well before the ball comes to them. So many times as goalkeepers, we are forced into situations where we're just reactionary, right? So we're reacting to everything that goes on around us. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's just part of the game. But I find that U9, U10 players and younger, they're just not quite there, right? I mean, they're learning, they're growing physically, and all of that stuff that we have as older players. The younger developmental players, they're just not going to quite have it yet. They're not going to notice. Their brain's not going to be trained well enough to know, all right, shot to my right, what do I do? So I found that I needed to really work on proper catching technique. Now that's the technical aspects. What's my hand positioning? What happens when a ball is, at my feet, right? What happens when a ball is around my belly button? What happens when a ball's up in the air? That proper catching technique really, really changed how I went about even the beginning stages of a training session all the way through to the end and embedded within. I yet again, this episode is all about me poking fun at myself, so I hope everyone's enjoying that. But I mean, we've got to be honest here, right? When I was out on the fields again, looking at players, doing some evaluations, I saw, again, I'm thinking, oh yeah, these guys, everybody's ready to go. These kids have learned, and they truly had. They clearly improved, and I was seeing it, right? But I needed to figure out, okay, if I'm seeing it in my training sessions, that doesn't necessarily mean it translates to a game, to live play. So I go out, I'm watching a couple games, and we had just had a week where, and hold your laughter to the end, please. We had a week, in one of my training sessions, I worked on high balls. So I wasn't really working on them with 8 or 9-year-olds, but let's just say, I think they were probably around the U12, 11, 12. But just for sake of the argument, they were probably a little too young to be focusing on a session of high balls. Now, I'm not talking we did flighted balls and crosses from 30 yards out on a string, but we're talking balls tossed in, the technique. So I don't know that that was as bad, but here I am out there, evaluating on the weekends thinking, oh man, I can't wait to see one of my guys, one of my gals out there, one of these young players go out and really collect a corner kick or go out and collect a ball that's flighted through the air. I kid you not one, I was watching one game, not one ball in the air that the goalkeeper had to deal with. And I'm sitting here just stumped, and I'm thinking, well, what am I doing? Reflecting back, it's completely idiotic to think that a U9 player needs to focus a lot of their time on a flighted ball. When in the world is the ball even really in the air to the goalkeeper on purpose, right? I'm not saying it doesn't go in the air. Boot ball is a beautiful thing in the U.S., right? I'm being sarcastic, of course, but, the long ball isn't really a factor. Players aren't strong enough yet. And here I am looking again, doing this whole reflection time of, way to go, Tyler, you idiot. You spent an entire hour of time on a topic that, though it's critical probably in a year or two from now, and it is important and helpful, it's not what these keepers need to be working on. So, that was an opportunity for me to kind of look in the mirror and say, come on, you've got to put your mind, and we've got to be better at really understanding, look, if I can pick 3, 4 things, and that's why we've got 4 here, if I'm picking 4 things over a season to really hone in and focus on, to drill down on with these young players, what are they? And my 4 things, well, probably more my 10 things, they were unrealistic, a lot of them. I'm sure they help the keepers because naturally you're out there, they're training, they're young, they're getting their hands on a ball, they're hearing me talk about stuff, and we're going through, certain topics, and we are discussing a lot of the fundamentals and breaking it down. So they were improving, but I question how much more could they have improved, right? If we were a little more focused. So again, we're talking proper catching technique being number 2 of what to teach these young girls and boys out there in terms of in the net. Diving, not so much at U9 and below. That's number three. I see, thank goodness I didn't make this mistake. But, diving wasn't ever really a focus. We discussed it. I showed the visuals myself. Because, again, do not forget throughout all of this, do not forget that the players at a young age are so incredibly visual. I mean, so incredibly visual. So, if you're the goalkeeper coach or the coach in general, that maybe you don't have the technique, use other players out there as examples. Use other players out there that are doing it the right way. If you can't show them yourself, use that as an example. Show them. Have a visual. So we didn't really work a whole lot on diving at that level and below. But what we did work on, being number four, it kind of bridges into number four. We did work on just movement and positioning in the goal. Now, I'm not talking cutting down angles, coming out to the 1v1 and destroying the attacker. We're talking what happens when the ball goes from left to right, right? Just simple stuff. At the U10 and above level, we touch on it and we get into a little bit more detail. So, the fourth thing is right around the U9, U10. So when the players are kind of hitting that point where they've done it or seen it a little bit longer, maybe hopefully you're in a case where you've got players consistent year to year. But at the U10 and above level, we just start to touch on positioning, okay? The reason for this is to stress the importance of protecting the near post. Right? Cut down the angle. You can touch on the topic. I wouldn't dive down into the mathematics of it necessarily, being sarcastic. But we're talking, think about the ball that transitions from left to right. Think about how many times you see young players and even frankly older players as well that they don't move across the goal. They're not aware. They're not sure of how to get from right post to left post to close the angle. So we talk about the idea, the terminology, but we don't drill down into it on a high level. Basically, the visual is simple. Ball's passed from left to right. What do? Right? How do you move across the goal? So, cutting down the angle, I bring that up and we do talk about that term because I find it's extremely critical, even at the young age groups. So this technically could be added into my list, but this is something I think naturally you're already doing, so I didn't include it. It's start to use the same words over and over, right? The same words in goalkeeping, the goalkeeping terminology that we know, now or 5 years from now or 8, 10 years from now, if the player is still playing, they hear one word, they know what it means. So we have to start them young, even at the younger age groups, to just understand and hear terms, to learn, right? It's all about education. So we can help them physically become better goalkeepers, but mentally, intelligence level, we can also improve that aspect as well by starting them young with certain words. You're talking, phrases as well, but cut down the angles. Calling keeper when you go out for a save. Just reinforce that terminology. You don't have to give them Webster's Dictionary's definition of it in terms of goalkeeping, but let's start to encourage them to think about these things, to hear these things, to become that intelligent player. I think that we're starting to see that impact where you've got really phenomenal coaches at the lower levels that are developing players, both with their physical skills, their technical aspects, but also some of that tactical knowledge. And I think some of the tactical knowledge we as coaches can start to instill in our players and our goalkeepers is what they're comfortable hearing, right? What they're comfortable in terms of when you're going through a session, the IQ of the player has been increased. So, cutting down the angle, it's more of a concept, a philosophy, a visual. Don't drill down into it. I think that's a little bit high level just in terms of the attention span that's required. But I think you emphasize moving across the goal mouth as the ball travels left to right, right to left. You can even do that without incorporating any saves to begin with, and I suggest that. And then the other thing that with the U10 players, other than stressing the importance of the near post, would also be getting them off their line to collect a free ball that's rolled in their area. I was the same kind of reflective period where I was out viewing games and evaluating players. I saw a lot of my players that I felt, man, yeah, they're the one. They got some skill, right? They struggle to know when to get off their line. It wasn't. I don't know that it was as much a fear of contact, but I think it was more not knowing, is it okay, and that goes back to kind of my reflection of what do these kids do when they have the ball in their hands, and I didn't even think about that. And this is the same philosophy, right? Why not encourage them to use the skills that you're teaching them and that they're learning? Get off the line, try to collect the ball. Again, not necessarily looking to 1v1 go out and smash someone, attacking them. I don't necessarily know that. I mean, you can encourage it, but I don't know that's where the comfort level of this particular aged player at the U10, U10-ish level is going to be. But we're talking a free ball that rolls in. Go encourage them. All right. Think about how that helps them develop as a player. Right. Then they've got the ball in their hands. All right. Then we can work on, then what do you do next? Right. Where do you go with the ball? What do you do? All right. Where are you distributing the ball? So I think that ultimately that's going to help the development of the entire player as they continue to grow. So then I think that we have to spend a little bit of time on working what they should do after they get their ball in the hands, right? I've touched on that, and that was something I didn't even struggle with it. Let's get real here. I completely blew over the topic completely and was looking at, all right, here's a PK. No, not seriously, but I mean it's something that's so critical at these young age groups. What do you do? So I was able, when